I still remember the sting of her words like they were etched into my skin. "Danielle, let's not waste everyone's time," Mrs. Peyton said, her voice clipped like always. "Some of us are just not cut out for academics." The classroom was still. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights and the shuffling of notebooks as a few kids tried to look busy, anything to avoid eye contact with me. I stood frozen at the front of the room, my presentation half finished, my slideshow paused on a quote from Maya Angelou. I'd worked on this all weekend. No parties, no sleepovers, just me, a second-hand laptop, and the hope that for once, someone would say, "Well done." Instead, I was told in front of 30 classmates that I was wasting time. She didn't say I was stupid, not directly. But she didn't have to. Mrs. Peyton had a gift for tearing students down with a sweet smile and a passive-aggressive undertone. Her eyes sparkled when she said things like, "Not everyone has to go to college," or "You're more of a hands-on type, right?" I wanted to crawl into the floor and disappear. But I didn't cry. Not in front of her. I turned back to the screen, heart pounding, hands trembling, and I finished the last 2 slides. My voice cracked once. No one clapped. Mrs. Peyton didn't offer feedback. She just scribbled something down in her leather-bound planner and called up the next student like I hadn't even existed. When I sat back down, Brianna, who sat beside me and only liked me when she wanted test answers, leaned over and whispered, "That was rough." I nodded, lips pressed together. If I said anything, the tears would come, and I wasn't about to give Mrs. Peyton that satisfaction. That moment became a turning point, though I didn't know it yet. A few days later, my midterm paper was handed back to me with a giant red C+ and a sticky note that read, "Danielle, vague ideas. Needs structure. Please consider seeing a counselor about your post-grad plans." It wasn't just the grade. It was the fact that no matter how hard I tried, how many nights I stayed up editing, rewriting, researching, I was always seen as less than. I wanted to believe I was more than that. But what if she was right? What if I wasn't college material? What if I was just a girl from the east side of Cleveland, being raised by a single dad who worked night shifts and couldn't help with homework, and a sister who dropped out at 16 and never looked back? What if I was invisible? That night, I sat on my bed and stared at the glowing screen of my laptop. My scholarship application was half finished. I was supposed to write about an obstacle I'd overcome. I closed the laptop. I didn't finish the essay. Not that week. The rest of senior year was a blur of silent survival. I stopped raising my hand in class. I walked the halls like a ghost, trying to stay out of trouble, trying to just get through. My grades slipped from A's and B's to straight B's and the occasional C. I stopped attending the after-school poetry club, the one place I felt like I had a voice. Mrs. Peyton's words haunted me, even when she wasn't around. She taught senior literature and, unfortunately, it was a required course. I had to sit in her class every day until June. Every day, I watched her favor the same few students: Emma, the student body president, Jordan, the debate team star, and Samantha, her own daughter, who transferred in mid-year after her old school wasn't challenging enough. Samantha Peyton had her mother's posture, spine straight, eyes alert, voice confident. She got A's on papers that read like Google summaries. She walked into class 10 minutes late one day and still got credit for participation. The unfairness of it all made me sick. Once, during a timed writing assignment, I caught Samantha staring at her phone under the desk. I thought about saying something, about standing up. But what would have happened? I'd be branded as bitter, unstable, jealous. So I said nothing. And that became a pattern. Then came graduation week. My name was nowhere on the list of honor students. I wasn't invited to the senior banquet. I didn't even get nominated for the Most Improved award, even though I'd brought up my GPA from a 2.3 to a 3.4 in less than a year. No one noticed. No one cared. At the final class meeting, Mrs. Peyton stood at the podium with her perfect hair and her pearl necklace and said something that made me clench my fists under the table. Not all journeys look the same, and that's okay. Some of our students are off to Ivy League schools. Others are entering trades, and some are still finding their way. She didn't say my name, but her eyes flicked to me. And I knew. I knew. After the ceremony, I stood outside the gym while parents hugged their kids and teachers handed out cards and compliments. My dad was working. My sister was late. I held my rolled-up diploma like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. Mrs. Peyton walked past me with Samantha on her arm.
She didn't look at me.
She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even nod. But Samantha did. Just for a second. It wasn't a kind look. It was curious. Calculating. Like she'd heard things. Like she already knew who I was supposed to be. And who I wasn't. But what no one knew, what even I didn't fully understand yet, was that this was not the end of my story. This was the beginning. Because 5 years later, I'd be standing in front of a polished glass office with my name etched in gold on the door. Danielle Carter, founder and CEO, Atlas Media Solutions. And on that same day, I'd receive a job application from none other than Samantha Peyton, freshly graduated, eager to work, glowing recommendations. With her mother's name right there on the reference list. Fate has a sense of humor. And I was finally ready to laugh. If you'd asked anyone back then, they would have said I was quiet but nice. Polite. Responsible. Maybe a little shy. The kind of girl who stayed late to help clean up the classroom even if she wasn't asked. The kind of kid teachers assumed was doing fine, even when she wasn't. But what they didn't see was the girl who came home to an empty house most days, whose dinner was often a microwaved burrito and a half-watched rerun, whose only real comfort came from writing poems in the margins of old notebooks. My dad, Rodney Carter, was doing the best he could. After Mom died when I was 10, he stepped up, or at least tried to. But the grief never really left him. It settled into his shoulders and his eyes and his long night shifts at the distribution center. We barely talked some days. Not out of anger, just exhaustion. He worked 12-hour graveyard shifts and still made it to my school conferences in wrinkled shirts and steel-toe boots. He wasn't great with words, but he showed up. That meant everything to me. Then there was my older sister, Kelsey. Kelsey had a fire in her. She was the kind of person who kicked doors open until one day life kicked back. She dropped out in her junior year after an ugly breakup and a pregnancy scare that turned out to be a false alarm. She worked at a diner, then a tattoo shop, then nowhere at all. She stayed out late, slept in later, and floated in and out of our lives like a storm cloud. People called her a rebel. I called her lost. And somewhere between Dad's silence and Kelsey's chaos, I learned to be small. To not need too much. To be the glue that held things together. Quietly, invisibly. I woke up early to pack my own lunches. I paid the electric bill once when Dad forgot, using babysitting money. I made a spreadsheet of FAFSA deadlines and scholarship portals, things no one taught me, but I figured out anyway. I was the girl who always smiled and said, "I'm okay." Even when I wasn't. Especially then. When I was 13, I got my first real taste of what it meant to be overlooked. It was during middle school honors night. I had perfect attendance, straight A's, and had won a regional poetry contest. But the only award I got that night was a generic participation in art club certificate. No speech. No name call. Nothing. Meanwhile, a girl named Rachel, whose mom volunteered at the school, got called up 3 times. I remember sitting there, hands folded in my lap, heart pounding as each award passed me by. My name never came. When we got in the car, Dad said, "Well, maybe next year, huh?" I nodded. But next year came and went. And still, I was invisible. That same pattern followed me into high school. I was never bad enough to worry about, never brilliant enough to brag about. I was just fine. And being fine in a world that only celebrates extremes meant being forgotten. Even teachers who claimed to care never really saw me. Except one, Mrs. Bennett, my 10th grade English teacher. She was soft-spoken but firm, and she once wrote on my paper, "You write like someone with a truth that needs to be told. Don't hide it." I carried that note in my wallet for 2 years. But by senior year, Mrs. Bennett had retired, and I was back to being a ghost. Especially in Mrs. Peyton's class. Mrs. Peyton had a daughter, Samantha, who attended a private academy up until her senior year. When Samantha transferred to our school, people whispered it was because she got into trouble, something about cheating on a final or getting caught vaping in the bathroom. But no one ever confirmed it. What we did know was that Mrs. Peyton treated Samantha like she walked on water. She bragged about her natural leadership and impeccable grammar, even when Samantha's papers were clearly mediocre. Meanwhile, I was busting my back for B-minuses. I didn't complain, though. I never did. Not when Mrs. Peyton refused to let me retake a quiz after I missed class to take Dad to urgent care. Not when she gave Samantha a glowing recommendation for a national essay contest, the same one she told me I might not be ready for. I swallowed the injustice. Again and again, until it became normal. At home, things weren't much different. Kelsey had moved back in after losing her apartment, and suddenly I was sharing a room with someone who played music at 3 a.m. and borrowed my clothes without asking. She was loud and opinionated and messy. And worst of all, she still thought she knew better. "College isn't all that," she told me one night, legs kicked up on the coffee table. "You think a piece of paper's gonna fix anything? Look at me. I've been fine without it." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "I'm not you." To which she smirked and replied, "You're damn right." Dad didn't intervene. He never did. He just sat at the table sipping day-old coffee, staring at bills like they were puzzles he'd never solve. So I stayed in my lane, focused on school, tried to keep the peace. Even when it hurt. When college acceptance letters started rolling in, I didn't tell anyone about mine. I'd gotten into Kent State. Not an Ivy League, but it was a real university, and I had a partial scholarship. I wanted to study communications, or maybe journalism. I hadn't decided yet. I just knew I wanted out. Out of the house. Out of Mrs. Peyton's shadow. Out of invisibility. But fear held me back. I kept thinking about Mrs. Peyton's words. Some of us are just not cut out for academics. What if she was right? What if I got there and failed? What if I really was a waste of space? There was one night, 2 weeks before graduation, where I nearly threw it all away. I was sitting on the back porch with my laptop open, Kent State's tuition portal on one tab, and an application for a local retail job on the other. Kelsey came out, barefoot and smoking. "What are you doing?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. "Nothing." She stared at the screen. Then, to my surprise, said quietly, "You should go." I blinked.
What?
She exhaled. "You're better than this place.
Better than me.
You've always been the one with a brain." It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was the closest she'd ever come to one.
And it was enough.
That night, I clicked accept offer on Kent State. I didn't tell Mrs. Peyton. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing I made it. Let her believe I'd fade away. Let her think I was still finding my way. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is silence. And sometimes being underestimated is the best motivator in the world. Graduation day. The sun was too bright, the folding chairs too flimsy, and everything smelled like hairspray and sunscreen. Families waved little fans with their kids' faces printed on them. Balloons bounced above heads. The camera shutters clicked endlessly. And me? I stood in line backstage with my cap tilted slightly to the left, palms sweating, heart beating way too fast. I had made it, despite the late nights, despite the whispered doubts, despite Mrs. Peyton. I was here, about to walk across that stage, take my diploma, and prove I belonged. But just before it was my turn, a whisper slithered through the line. "Did you hear what Mrs. Peyton said?" 2 girls behind me were talking low, but not low enough. She told someone Danielle probably wouldn't walk. Said she might not have the credits. I froze. That wasn't true. I had the credits. I'd double-checked with the counselor a week ago. Still, my chest squeezed. Did she really say that? I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch the look in one girl's eyes. Wide, a little embarrassed. She knew I heard. Before I could respond, the line began to move. Names were being called. Applause erupted. And when mine was announced, Danielle Carter, I stepped out into the blinding sun, head held high. I smiled, even as I burned inside. After the ceremony, I found my dad in the crowd. He was holding a tiny bouquet of gas station flowers, wearing the only collared shirt he owned, which still had a tiny grease stain on the sleeve. He smiled like the sun lived in my eyes. But beside him stood Mrs. Peyton. I stopped cold. She was grinning, that fake, pinched smile she gave to students she didn't respect but needed to pretend she did. "I suppose I owe you congratulations," she said, arms folded. "You proved me wrong." I blinked. Just that? Just that? After everything, the discouragement, the favoritism, the subtle digs, that's all she had to say? Before I could respond, she added with a soft chuckle, "Of course, Samantha already got early admission to Columbia. You two took very different paths." There it was. The comparison. The implication. Even now, I wasn't enough.
Dad didn't say anything.
He just looked at me, unsure. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thanks for coming," I said, not to her, to my dad. Then I turned and walked away. A week later, I got a friend request from Samantha Peyton. It was odd, considering we'd barely spoken in school. I clicked on her profile out of curiosity. The most recent post? A smiling selfie with the caption, "Graduated with distinction. So proud to be following in my mom's footsteps." Below it, a comment from Mrs. Peyton herself. "Some students just rise above. Can't wait to see you thrive, sweetheart. Unlike others, you were always meant to make it." I didn't comment. I didn't message. But I did screenshot it. And I saved it. Because someday I knew I'd show the world that what they dismissed wasn't failure, it was fuel. But the final hit came during our school's post-grad award banquet. It wasn't mandatory. Just a small gathering in the library for select seniors. Teachers gave out superlatives, most likely to succeed, best essayist, best presentation skills. I hadn't planned on going, but Dad encouraged me. "You never know," he said. So I went. I sat near the back, wearing a blue dress I found at a thrift store, heart cautiously hopeful. And when the Outstanding Achievement in English award was announced, the very subject I'd poured my soul into for 4 years, Mrs. Peyton took the podium. She cleared her throat and said, "This student has demonstrated creativity, resilience, and an exceptional ability to communicate with grace." My stomach flipped. She was describing me. She had to be. "And I am thrilled to present this year's award to," she smiled, "Samantha Peyton." Applause exploded. My world did not. I sat frozen. Samantha rose from her chair across the room, hugged her mom, and took the plaque. Not a glance toward me. Not a single acknowledgement. It was the final message, loud and clear. "You weren't good enough." Afterward, I left quietly. No goodbyes. No photo booth poses. No cookie table visits. Just silence. That night, I lay on my bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why I ever thought I could rise above people like her. Why I believed effort would be enough. Why I imagined that someone would finally say, "You matter. You did it." But that moment never came. Not then. Not from them. But something inside me, something small and stubborn, whispered, "They don't get to decide your story." That voice was quiet, but it held more truth than any award. It reminded me, people like Mrs. Peyton don't see your worth unless it shines in their light. And I was done chasing that. Done shrinking. Done begging to be seen. It was time to write my own ending. On my own terms. Without them. After the banquet, I deleted the screenshot of Samantha's post. Not out of forgiveness. Not because I was over it. But because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need evidence. I didn't need to prove to anyone that I'd been overlooked, dismissed, disrespected. Because I finally understood something no one had ever taught me. Silence can be a form of strength. For years, I had tried to earn a seat at their table. Tried to impress teachers like Mrs. Peyton. Tried to be the student who smiled through the sting, who wrote beautiful essays and kept her head down and didn't make noise. But I was done performing. I stopped replying to the emails from my old school. Stopped attending alumni mixers. Unsubscribed from every college prep newsletter they forwarded me. I didn't make a speech. I didn't post a long, thank you to the haters video. I just disconnected. Quietly.
Completely.
I think that's what unsettled them most. Because when someone disappears, not in anger, not in revenge, but in peace, it leaves an echo. One they can't explain or silence. I started working at a local bookstore. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't Ivy League, but it was mine. My manager, Claire, was a woman in her 60s with cropped silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't care where I graduated from. She cared that I showed up on time, treated customers with respect, and recommended good books. She gave me space to breathe. And in that space, I began to rebuild myself, quietly. I enrolled in online writing classes in the evenings. Not because I wanted a grade, but because I wanted to learn, for me. For once, I wasn't writing essays for Mrs. Peyton's approval. I was writing stories about people like me. Girls who'd been overlooked. Girls who'd been dismissed, underestimated, forgotten. Girls who didn't need permission to matter. One day, a customer walked in looking completely frazzled. She had 2 little kids pulling at her sleeves and the kind of tired eyes that told you life had been unforgiving lately. She asked if we had any books for young readers who'd lost a parent. Her son had just lost his dad. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked into her eyes, those worn, searching eyes, and something in me softened. I knelt, pulled a copy of The Invisible String from the shelf, and said, "This one helped a friend of mine. It talks about how we're always connected to the people we love, even if we can't see them anymore." She blinked fast, nodded, then whispered, "Thank you." She left with the book, and I never saw her again. But something shifted that day. I realized I didn't need a title or a stage to make a difference. Sometimes, healing came in the quiet gestures. Sometimes, impact was made in silence. A few weeks later, my dad called. "Mrs. Peyton's retiring," he said casually. "It's all over Facebook." I didn't even flinch.
He paused.
"You want to know who they're considering to replace her?" I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. "Not really. They're looking for someone who understands modern teaching, someone who connects with students. One of the parents on the board brought your name up." I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was that kind of laugh you let out when life finally starts to make ironic sense. "Not interested," I said. "Let them find someone else to carry that torch." "You sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." Because the truth was, I didn't want a seat at their table anymore. I wanted to build my own. Later that night, I sat on my tiny balcony, a cup of tea in hand, notebook on my lap. I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd shed, and how peaceful the silence had become. This wasn't running away. This was returning to myself. I wasn't the girl who needed validation anymore. I was the woman who'd found her worth in her own quiet way. Not by proving them wrong, but by proving myself right. It started with a letter. A physical letter, not an email, not a DM, not a message on LinkedIn or Instagram. It came in a cream-colored envelope with gold cursive letters printed across the front. Danielle Carter. Care of Bluebird Books, Charleston, South Carolina. No return address. Just a wax seal on the back, pressed with the tiniest embossed initials. SB. I froze when I saw it, because those initials could only mean one thing. Samantha Peyton. I didn't open it at first. I let it sit on my dresser for 2 days. Then one evening, after a long shift and a quiet dinner, I finally slid a letter opener beneath the seal. It was a single sheet of thick, lined stationery, the kind you only use for something real. And it read,
Danielle.
I don't know if you'll read this, or if you care to hear from me, but I needed to say something that I should have said a long time ago. When we were in school, I thought I understood who you were. I thought I was the smart one, the one who deserved things. Because that's what I was told by teachers, by my mom, by everyone. But something happened last month that shattered that image for me. My cousin was visiting from New York. She's in the publishing industry. She walked into Bluebird Books and came home raving about this young woman behind the counter, someone who recommended a book that helped her son after a rough year. She said the girl reminded her what compassion looks like. She didn't even know it was you. She found out later, through a shared friend on Instagram. That's when I realized, all these years, They painted you as less than. But you were more. More heart. More fire. More grace. And I was too blind or too afraid to see it. I don't know if it matters now. But I needed you to know that I see it. And I hope others do too. Samantha. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't tremble. I just sat still, stunned. Not because of her words, but because someone outside the old system had seen me. Had seen what Mrs. Peyton never could. It wasn't Samantha's apology that healed anything. It was the woman from New York. The stranger who didn't know the history, the gossip, the hierarchy. The woman who had walked into my story, into my present, and recognized something real. That's what shattered the illusion. That's what mattered. 2 days later, Claire, my manager, pulled me aside. "You've got a fan," she said with a grin. I raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "A woman named Allison Cohen. Big-time editor from a publishing house in Manhattan. She wants to meet you next time she's in Charleston." I blinked. "Wait, why?" Claire shrugged. She said she had a conversation with someone who said you recommended a book that changed her son's life. Then she looked you up. Read a blog post you published last year on our store site about grief and healing and being unseen. I swallowed hard. She said your voice is what the world needs. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because for so long I thought I was writing into a void. I thought I was whispering into silence. But someone had heard me. Later that night, I pulled out my laptop, opened a new document, and at the top of the page I typed, "To the girls they called invisible, I see you. I was you." And I wrote. For hours. Not for grades. Not for approval. Not for Mrs. Peyton. But for the woman I had become. And for the one still becoming. It didn't take long. 3 weeks after I received the letter from Samantha, after Allison Cohen's email landed in my inbox, after Claire started dropping hints about a local news outlet wanting to do a small feature on the bookstore girl, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Peyton. I stared at it. Not a text. Not an email. A call. And something told me this wasn't about nostalgia. I let it ring out. I didn't even flinch when voicemail buzzed in. But curiosity, well, it's human. I waited until I was home, curled up with my tea, the lamp on low. Then I hit play. "Danielle, hello. It's Mrs. Peyton. I hope you're well. I heard you've been doing some really wonderful things at the bookstore. Helping people. Writing. Listen, there's been some chatter lately. A few people on the school board mentioned your name. I think they saw a post or maybe an article. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." Proud of me? The same woman who once said, "I hope you find a trade school that accepts late bloomers." Now she was proud. The voicemail continued. "You know, sometimes we educators miss things. Talents. Stories. I'd love for you to come speak at the school sometime. Maybe to the graduating class. A little full-circle moment, don't you think? Let me know. I think it'd be good for the students. And for you." For me? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable.
I didn't respond.
I didn't need to, because I finally understood what this was about.
It wasn't about me. It was about them.
Their image. Their guilt. Their need to spin the narrative. Suddenly, the girl who might not graduate was someone worth claiming. Suddenly, Mrs. Peyton wanted to be part of my story, the polished part, the public part. She didn't want to understand me. She wanted to own the credit for who I became. It didn't stop there. A week later, my dad called. "Danielle," he said, cautious, "Mrs. Peyton's daughter's been reaching out to me." "Samantha?" I asked.
No.
"The younger one. Megan. She's interning at some education nonprofit in D.C. Says they want to do a feature on former students who've defied expectations. And your name came up." I bit my lip. "Let me guess," I said. "They want a quote? A video clip? Maybe a smiling photo of me holding a book under some inspirational quote about resilience." My dad hesitated. "She just wants to talk." "No, Dad," I said calmly. "She wants to use me." He sighed. "I just think it might help. You know, if there's still any bad blood." "There's no blood," I said. There's just distance. And I like it that way. 2 days later, I got the email. Subject line: "Let's reconnect, for old time's sake." From Samantha Peyton.
No.
Just no. I didn't even open it. I blocked the address.
Because that's the thing about people like that.
They don't reach out to repair. They reach out to reclaim, to reframe the narrative, to paint over history with pastel apologies and performative hugs. But I wasn't theirs to repaint anymore. Claire noticed my silence that week. "You okay?" she asked while restocking the new arrivals table. "Yeah," I said. "Just processing."
She tilted her head.
"The world finally sees you, huh?" I smiled faintly. "Parts of it. Some parts still want to own me." She laughed. "Let them want. You don't owe them a damn thing." And she was right. I didn't. So, I went back to writing. Back to shelving books. Back to watching the faces of strangers soften when they found stories that mirrored their own. That's where I belonged. Not on their stage. Not in their carefully curated redemption arc. But in the quiet, where the real healing lived. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. The bookstore was quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens during thunderstorms, soft, humming, almost sacred. I was behind the counter, thumbing through a shipment of new releases when a voice interrupted me. "Excuse me, are you Danielle?" I looked up. She was older, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with silver curls, wide, kind eyes, and a burgundy shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Yes," I said carefully. "Can I help you?" She smiled. "I was hoping you could help me. My name's Ruth. My granddaughter is going through a hard time, and someone told me you'd know just what book to give her." I blinked.
Who told you that?
She stepped closer. "A woman named Allison Cohen." My breath caught in my throat. "She said you helped her cousin last year. That you have a gift. That you don't just recommend books, you prescribe them. Like medicine for the soul." I swallowed hard, suddenly blinking back tears. It wasn't just the compliment. It was that someone had passed my name along like a quiet blessing. From heart to heart. Story to story. Ruth leaned on the counter, eyes searching mine. She said you'd know exactly what a grieving 17-year-old might need to hear. I took a deep breath, my mind already scanning titles like an instinct. Then I reached for the perks of being a wallflower. "I think this one," I said softly. "It's gentle, honest, and it doesn't try to fix her, just sits beside her." Ruth smiled, tears springing in her own eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You just helped 3 generations of women. More than you'll ever know." She left, but something lingered. A warmth, a clarity, a weight lifted. That night, I found an old journal in my drawer, one I hadn't opened since high school. I flipped through pages of scribbled dreams and late-night doubts, some written after humiliating parent-teacher meetings, others after crying in the bathroom during finals. One entry caught my eye. "I want to write books. Or help people find books. I want to be the person I needed." And now, I was. Not in the loud, public, glamorous way the world likes to measure success, but in the quiet, sacred spaces that actually matter. In conversations between shelves. In whispered thank yous and strangers passing your name like a secret miracle. A few days later, Claire handed me a package that had arrived at the store. Brown paper. No label. Inside was a hand-bound notebook, thick cream pages, stitched with golden thread. On the first page, someone had written, "You didn't just recommend a book. You helped me remember my daughter. Thank you for reminding me that stories don't end. They evolve." Daniels, Allison's cousin. I pressed the notebook to my chest and let the tears fall. Not because I was sad, but because I was finally seen. Not as the dropout. Not as the disappointment. Not as Mrs. Peyton's lesson in failure. But as me. The next day, I started writing again. Not in fear. Not in anger. But in love for the girl I was. For the women who walked into my store searching for something they couldn't name. And for the ones who never got their apology. I dedicated the new piece to them. To the ones they underestimated. Who bloomed in silence. and turned every wound into wisdom. It was a Sunday morning. Quiet. Crisp. I was sipping coffee by the bookstore window, watching the light scatter through the leaves, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Voicemail. I wasn't going to listen. But something in me, curiosity, maybe closure, pressed play. Danielle, it's Samantha Payton. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I've been thinking about you. About everything. You probably know my mom's retiring this year. She asked me to reach out. She says she regrets how things ended. We were wondering if you'd consider coming to the ceremony. As a guest of honor. You know, full circle. I think it could be healing for everyone. The message ended. No apology. No real acknowledgement. Just optics. Healing for everyone?
No.
Healing had already happened, but not where they were looking. Not in staged ceremonies or carefully planned tributes. Not in the sanitized versions of the past they wanted to display. Healing had happened in books. In whispered conversations at the counter. In the smile of a grieving grandmother. In the notebook wrapped in brown paper. In the version of myself I had rebuilt, without their help. I didn't call back. Instead, I took a walk. Down to the school. The gates were still locked. It was the weekend, but I stood across the street, just looking. The brick building hadn't changed. The same crooked flagpole. The same chip sign. The same row of windows that once framed a younger, quieter me, staring out during algebra, wondering if I'd ever be more than invisible. I whispered under my breath. I don't need your stage. And I meant it. That week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old email account, the one I used in high school. Inbox, 238 unread. I scrolled. Past notifications, spam, university rejections. Then I found it, the last message I had ever sent to Mrs. Payton right after she told me I wouldn't graduate. The subject line? I'll still try. The body of the email was short. Awkward. Typed from a school computer during lunch break. Mrs. Payton, I know you don't think I'm capable, but I'm going to keep trying anyway. Maybe not for the diploma, maybe just to prove to myself that I can. I thought you should know. Danielle Carter. I reread it 3 times. And then, I hit delete. Because I no longer needed her to know. 2 weeks later, I got one more package at the bookstore. No return address. Inside was a gold-embossed invitation to the school's retirement ceremony, along with a note. Danielle, we hope you'll reconsider. You're a testament to what perseverance looks like. Please allow us to celebrate your journey. On behalf of the faculty, Springfield High School. I held it for a moment. Then I folded it back into the envelope and tucked it under a stack of donation books. No drama. No speech. No rage. Just a quiet, resolute no. That evening, I took a Polaroid selfie behind the counter. Just me, the books, the soft glow of string lights above my head. I posted it online with one simple caption. Not all full circles need applause. Some just need peace. I used to think closure came with an apology. That one day, someone would knock on my door, eyes soft with regret, and say the words I'd waited my whole life to hear. I was wrong about you, but that day never came. And now I'm thankful it didn't. Because I didn't need their permission to bloom. I just needed to stop believing them. If you're watching this, if you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or made to feel like your best would never be good enough, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You were never the problem. You were just surrounded by people too small to see the vastness in you. Too insecure to let you shine. Too invested in their version of your failure to imagine your future success. I know what it feels like to stand in a room full of people who pretend you're invisible. To be the student the teacher never calls on. The child the parent brags about less. The friend invited last or not at all. I know what it's like to walk home with shoulders heavy, eyes burning, and a heart whispering, maybe they're right. But they're not. Not even close. Here's what I've learned. Your value doesn't decrease because someone else failed to see it. You don't have to shout to be powerful. And sometimes, the strongest thing you'll ever do is walk away quietly. Not to punish. Not to prove anything. But to finally make space for your own voice. Healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's small and sacred. A kind customer, a quiet afternoon, a sentence in a book that feels like it was written just for you. Sometimes healing is deleting an old email without needing to send a new one. If you're still in the middle of it, if the wounds are fresh, if the rejections are recent, if you're wondering when your moment will come, I promise you this. You're not too late. You are not too sensitive. You are not difficult, lazy, or not enough. You are becoming. And becoming isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent and slow, like a tree growing deep roots before it ever breaks the surface. But one day, people will look up and realize you bloomed anyway. So here's my message to you. The one I wish someone had whispered to me in that classroom when I held my breath and blinked away tears behind my glasses. You are not what they called you.
You are what you keep surviving.
You are what you quietly build when no one's clapping. And you will rise. Not for revenge. Not for applause. But because rising is what you were born to do. From one quiet fighter to another.
Keep going.
And when they say you'll never graduate, hire their daughter and build a life so peaceful, so rooted in truth, that no ceremony could ever hold it.